Welcome to our last session of our technical symposium of the Management and Sustainability of Outer Space Activities Conference, organized by the Portuguese Space Agency together with the United Nations. Today we have with us our last panel with a lot of good speakers, moderator, and also our rapporteur. By now I will pass on the words to Ryan Guguieta, which will moderate by now our panel. Thank you very much, Ryan.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm just stepping in briefly for Mariel Borowitz, who will be on shortly and kind of just moderating the panel in the meantime. Luckily, Mariel was kind enough to send me her notes, so I do have some things to say, and I'm very much looking forward to kicking off this panel. I'm Ryan Guglietta. I'm from the U.S. Department of State's Office of Space Affairs and work in various international areas for outer space cooperation, including in areas of space traffic management and space situational awareness. Without further ado, I'm happy to introduce our speakers. I'll just give a brief introduction for each of them. There's Callum Herview, is the Flight Dynamics Operator Manager of Eutelsat, formerly OneWeb, which operates a low Earth orbit constellation of over 600. Oh, Mariel Borowitz is on, but I'll finish this introduction first. Of over 630 satellites, providing internet access to underserved regions across the globe. Alongside running the daily Flight Dynamics operations team, Callum's work focuses primarily on collision avoidance and space traffic management methodologies. And with that, my brief tenure as moderator has come to its conclusion, and I will turn it back over to Mariel.
For stepping in, and I'm very happy
you're
to be
muted.
here. Oh.
Still muted. We were so close.
I think back to you for moderator.
I'll read another introduction in the meantime. We also have Katia Flores Pozo, is Planet's Director of Space Operations in Berlin, Germany. Katia has worked in space operations for over 10 years, 9 of them at Planet. From the Rapid Eye constellation to the PlanetScope fleet, one of the largest constellations of Earth observing satellites, she leads a talented team of engineers applying agile aerospace principles to build scalable, efficient, and safe operations to power Planet's missions. Next, we have Professor Manfredi, holds a degree in aeronautical engineering from Imperial College London, a master's from the International Space University, and a PhD from RWTH Aachen. She works for the German Aerospace Center. And in 2016, she joined the European Space Agency as program advisor to the Director General, preparing ministerial meetings and coordinating programmatic content. In 2019, she was nominated to be for the first president of the Portuguese National Space Agency. Today, she is professor at TUM and director of COO of Neurospace. Next, we have Tim Floher. He leads ESA's Space Debris Office since 2020. He joined the office as the engineer in 2007. Since 2014, he is working at ESA's Space Situational Awareness Program and Space Safety Program and leads activities addressing the monitoring of space debris. In parallel, he is supporting operational collision avoidance activities for ESA and third-party missions, reentry predictions, mitigation analyses, long-term predictions of the space debris environment, and space debris risk assessments. Tim is an ESA delegate to the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee, or IADC, where he chairs Working Group 1 on measurements, and he was chair of Working Group 2 on environmental and database. Last but not least, we have Veronica Glaud. My apologies if I mispronounce this, but Claude is a senior engineer on radio regulations for the satellite services at the International Telecommunications Union. She joined the ITU in 1999 to deal with the compatibility analysis and recording of satellite network filings. Since 2018, she has been the ITU representative to COPUOS and other UN meetings. She continues to provide assistance and capacity building to the ITU member states and sector members. And with that, that is our distinguished slate of panelists. Let me just see. Mariel still seems like she's working out Mariel's back. Do we have audio? No, unfortunately, it does not seem like we do. All right. Well, still kick things off. So to start, Mariel was also kind enough to send a wonderful list of questions for the panelists, but perhaps if I could just turn to the panelists if they would like to give any brief opening statements. And I believe we had, I think David was set to be first. 1 second. Let's go to Katya. If you would not mind if you have any opening statement, or we can dive right into questions if that's more helpful.
Yeah, I have a small presentation. Maybe I can start with that.
Yes, of course.
Perfect. Give me a second. All right. Yes. Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for having us on this panel. Thanks to the Portuguese Space Agency and the UN for organizing this. Okay, perfect. I see the screen now. Yeah, my name is Katya. I'm the Director of Mission Operations at Planet. I'm based in Berlin. It's currently a very snowy Berlin, so happy to be here. Yeah, so I want to briefly talk about what we do at Planet, just quick what our mission is and why we are here. So our mission is to image the whole world every day, and our goal is to make global change visible, accessible, and actionable. For those of you that don't know, Planet is a public benefit corporation, and why that's important? That's important because we strive towards a more sustainable, secure, and prosperous world. And by having said that, sustainability on Earth depends also of sustainability on space. So that's why we're here, and that's why this is important to us. This is an extract from our sustainability report of 2023. So we have 4 main priorities in regards to space safety. So the first one is to promote an international ban on kinetic anti-satellite activity, and we have been very open about this. We had a letter out and just recently signed with other operators and the Secure World Foundation a similar open letter. One of the other priority for us is increasing situational awareness capabilities. We are also pro of satellite and launch operators to remove their mission hardware within 5 years after the end of the mission, which aligns with the FCC latest regulation changes. And lastly, we think and believe that governments should invest in the research and development to support fundamental capabilities to avoid large-scale collisions between defunct objects already in orbit, which was mentioned in a previous panel as well. Yeah, and because of that, because those being our priorities, we are very active and we are looking forward to share and learn from the community as much as possible. An example of this is we are part of different forums and organizations and conversations with governments. Just to mention some, the Net Zero Space Initiative, the World Economic Forum. I mentioned the anti-ASA test letter. And I'm also excited we were part of the first workshops of the ESA Zero Debris initiative. So being here is definitely part of our priority as well. Okay, so what do we do? Yeah, so space operations at Planet, over the last 10 years, we have launched successfully and safely more than 500 satellites. And from those, over 200 have successfully been disposed. How do we align with our priorities on space advocacy? We launch at low altitudes. Our largest fleets of Doves, they are like a very small form factor satellites. We launch them between 400 and 500, and that allows us to re-enter within a reasonable time, you know? And that allows us to then be responsible with our decommissioning timelines. For our larger type of spacecraft, we have propulsion on board that we also utilize to align with this. Another thing I want to highlight that also applies on our approach towards improving collision avoidance and space safety is agile aerospace. This just means we continuously iterate on our workflows and try to improve our constellation, but as well like how we are operating for others and for space sustainability. All right, and just real quick, I wanted to highlight some, since this panel is focused on collision avoidance and interoperability between operators, like some of the things that have been working well for us, and some of the main topics that I'm sure everyone is going to mention as well. So transparency and data sharing, I think we can't reinforce this enough, and I have heard this throughout the day as well. Yeah, so we try to do our part by sharing our ephemeris data. We update it regularly, multiple times a day, and we have a public-facing URL that anyone can just go and see. We have been doing that since 2016, and we create that data based on our GPS and ranging measurements. We make sure to range also satellites that are no longer operational until they reach a safe altitude, and they will just decay due to atmospheric drag very quickly. We have close collaboration with the 18 Space Defense Squadron, with NASA Conjunction Assessment Risk Analysis Team, the CARA team, and we have in place agreements with different operators, ISS Topo, CARA, and ESA, for example, with which we keep like close operational coordination. And this has been specifically helpful for us to learn what the other operators' risk posture are, what methods they're using, also to share what we are using, the data quality, decision points and criteria, and that definitely facilitates the cooperation between both, which is very important. Then in the topic of sharing, we actively coordinate and share our maneuver plans. We have in-house workflows that have also automation on them, but we make sure to safely plan for maneuvers, scan them, and coordinate as needed with others. We also have a public-facing email distribution so that anyone can reach us with. And this is what we use mainly for coordination. And we track all CDMs. We leverage internal evaluations plus SpaceTrack, Space Force, and we also use Leo Labs. And we track all CDMs that have a PC greater than 1 to the -5. And for that, we have 24/7 response support within our team. Okay, and just highlighting some of the challenges and improvements that I'm sure we're going to discuss later. Definitely, I think we should all work towards transparent and standardized data sharing. Sharing and regularly updating, not just sharing once, but also updating, the latest and best accuracy possible orbit ephemeris, including uncertainty measurements, because that's a factor. Sharing contact information, it might sound simple, but that is one of the biggest challenges, finding how to reach out to others. And then a standard data format, I think that would enable definitely interoperability that currently doesn't exist. Basically having a common language, the terminology, the standards, the thresholds each other are using, the methods to make sure that we are talking, comparing apples to apples. And then continuous improvement of SSA data quality. So this could be improving the ground-based tracking assets. I added the space because that's also an opportunity. That will allow to enhance the data, service, and space object catalog that currently exist. A specific pain point for LEO operators as well is having a better modeling of the atmospheric environment, because that would reduce uncertainties, certainly. And then the third point, not less important, as important, having a faster and more reliable data exchange and coordination. So right now, coordination relies on emails. There is not like SLAs on response times. Sometimes the interaction doesn't even get to a final point. So I think we should move towards automating that interaction, and for that, data standards it's a requirement. And then for data sharing, also moving towards a more automated way, perhaps having machine-to-machine interfaces for operators with standardized data sources, with APIs that anyone can just build their own systems on top and consume that data. And finally, define frameworks to understand common risk thresholds across different operators. Everyone evaluates differently, the PC, the TCA, the missed distance. So there are just different methodologies to do this that I think if they were commonly defined would make it easier to coordinate. And I believe that's my last slide. Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We may have Mariel back.
Yes,
You're still muted
I think I'm here
on
now.
the Teams end, though I believe you are heard on the YouTube channel.
Perfect. Okay,
In the meantime,
go ahead.
let me turn it over to Caleb. Apologies for skipping you in the beginning, and if you wouldn't mind giving your presentation.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much. Can I just check that you can hear me as well before we start?
On the team side, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to just share PowerPoint, if that's okay. Perfect. I think that should be good. So first of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation. I'm getting feedback from someone. There we go. I think that's good. Yes, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to speak here. The Eutelsat group is obviously, we're committed to preserve and promote on-orbit operational safety. So I'm really honored by the opportunity to share our experience. I agree with pretty much everything Katja just said, and I think you'll find a lot of common themes in here. So that is very encouraging. But before I begin, I'd like to give a very brief introduction to the Eutelsat group and to OneWeb. So Eutelsat is a space pioneer. They've been for more than 45 years, has experience as a GEO satellite operator. In late 2023, Eutelsat merged with OneWeb to form the Eutelsat group, providing both broadcast and broadband services worldwide. OneWeb completed a pilot launch in February of 2019 and have since completed more than 18 launch campaigns to build out the first generation constellation. We now have a combined fleet of 36 GEO satellites and 634 LEO satellites, making the Eutelsat group the first LEO GEO operator in the world. In the talk today, I'm going to focus mainly on the lessons learned from the LEO constellation, but I believe most of what we're talking about can be applied to all orbital regimes. So Eutelsat has prioritized space safety and sustainability best practices to ensure responsible coexistence with other operators within this rapidly evolving space environment. Given the substantial increase in the number of active satellites in LEO over the past 3 years, combined with the occurrence of fragmentation and anti-satellite events, we believe it's vital that all the industry actors take steps toward better operational practices. Throughout the sessions featured in this conference over the past 3 days, there have been many interesting topics, many critical topics that we could highlight, each of which represents a kind of foundational cornerstone that enables an entity such as Eutelsat to operate a large constellation safely. However, as one of the world's largest operators, we have a wealth of knowledge and efficient operational practices regarding space safety, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. If we really boil it down to its kind of the bare minimum that I would like to highlight, I think it kind of boils down to these what we call three pillars of operational excellence. Number one is to maintain quality predicted ephemeris and spacecraft maneuverability status for the organization's vehicle and regularly update this information with the chosen CA authority. For example, the US 19th Space Defense Squadron and on Space Track. Number two would be perform rapid and reliable CA risk assessment to identify high-risk conjunctions that require mitigation. And then number three is obviously to pursue adequate mitigation in order to avoid those high-risk conjunctions and ensure that these are properly and transparently coordinated. So going a bit deeper into each of these, every operator should be generating precise predicted ephemeris for all of their spacecraft, which should contain any planned trajectory changes and realistic covariances at each time step. The predicted ephemeris should follow the CCSDS standards, be generated at regular intervals, and preferably as soon as the state vector of the vehicle has been updated, i.e. via GPS. The status of any satellite in the operator's assets is inherently dynamic and must always be kept up to date with the CA screening authority. Particularly, it's crucial to ensure that this authority is made aware if the ability of the owner-operator to produce an accurate predicted ephemeris is compromised or if the satellite is rendered non-maneuverable. This would allow other operational vehicles to understand that they must take maneuver responsibility as required if a risky close approach is identified. Number two, after submitting regular precise ephemeris, the operator should commit to performing rapid and reliable conjunction assessment to identify any close approach events of concern. CA authorities typically issue CCSDS standard CDMs that include enough data to fully categorize the close approach. I believe that concern should be measured primarily by the industry standard PC, probability of collision, and any conjunctions which reach predetermined risk thresholds should be actively and rapidly investigated before being reacted against. In terms of pursuing mitigation actions, when a high-risk conjunction is identified, it's important to plan a mitigation action that will both reduce the risk of the principal conjunction by an order of magnitude 1.5 or greater, and avoid introducing through this trajectory change any other high-risk conjunction within the next, say, 48 hours. To determine clearance of any new potential trajectory, before maneuvering, we recommend that the operator should submit the corresponding EFEM for the new trajectory to the screening authority as a special ephemeris. And this category obviously marks the trajectory as prioritized trajectory and also marks it as proposed, which prevents confusion with other owner operators from seeing another operational ephemeris. Additionally, I think this is very important, is if the secondary object is an active payload, it is critical that the appropriate coordination is performed to allocate responsibility for mitigation actions between operators. Katia mentioned that this is largely done via email, and I think that this is acceptable in most cases. But I do believe that there's a lot of work that could be done here to make this a more automated and robust system. And for that reason, Eutelsat is currently trialing public platforms to allow for autonomous and standardized coordination of trajectory changes, particularly among larger operators. So I think there are overall great efforts being made by private entities towards safe and sustainable STM, following similar CONOPS to the best practices that we've laid out here. However, the current state of the art is quite far from perfect. There are some notorious gaps in several areas of the field that must be addressed if the long-term sustainability of the space environment is to be ensured. Of particular concern, we would highlight a lack of meaningful pre-launch conjunction screenings in the industry. As operational altitudes become more congested with new actors, the chances of risky close approaches in the launch and early operations phase is obviously going to increase. And currently, there's no industry standard or widely agreed practice to mitigate that risk. There's also a lack of an international and neutral platform where space traffic management and maneuver coordination can reliably take place, with actors from every country feeling encouraged to participate. And finally, would be a lack of harmonized regulation in the context of collision risk management and the acceptable and unacceptable practices. I think technical sessions such as this one are a vital way that we can share and promote best practices, knowledge learned among operators, government, policy, regulatory entities, space situational awareness providers, and others. And then finally, I would like to draw attention to this document, the Satellite Orbital Safety Best Practices document that was jointly published by OneWeb, SpaceX, and Iridium in September of 2022, which discusses most of the points I've raised here in much greater detail. And with that, I think I would just say thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'd be very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And I believe we may have Mariel back.
How about this? Can you hear me?
It does not seem that we do. Apologies again. And with that, I would happily turn it over to Professor Manfredi, if you would not mind your presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. I shall do my best to share. I hope you can all hear me. So we've heard presentations so far from different colleagues looking at some technical elements. What I decided to do today was to zoom out a little bit and try and also talk a little bit about the ecosystem that we're trying to build, trying to understand what is necessary for a successful space sustainability, as there's a few things which I find very challenging in current conversations beyond the technical, obviously, difficulties or gaps that we still have to close. Now, I believe that there's a number of key ingredients that are actually necessary to making space sustainability successful, and these are them really, and I'll go through them in just a second. So one of them is certainly the economic viability of it, and I do think that there's very easy ways of making this happen. Obviously, we need public sector commitment and consistent behavior, and I'll get to that as well in a second. Obviously, private sector efforts, joint efforts and commitment, and we've already heard from a number of actors as to things that are being done, and I believe that there's several private sector entities that are showing a strong commitment, which is great, but we need more. Then obviously the capability to implement new approaches and to do so also at a faster pace. And then, of course, we also heard about regulation, technology, and business-informed regulation. And sometimes I do feel that it's missing. And of course, raising awareness and raising talent so that there's also new blood and more people involved. But I think also on this last element, we are progressing. So let me go through some of these elements and try and share some thoughts. Now, I start from a very pragmatic premise, which is I don't believe that we can actually fund space sustainability relying just on public sector funding. So we need to make sure that it makes economic sense. And how do we do that? Of course, is that we bring in private sector funding as well for that, meaning that we trigger these private investments either through venture capital or otherwise, because it's clear that space sustainability is a market. So making sure that anybody who invests in space sustainability has a feeling that they will get a return on this investment will actually trigger private investments and will make space sustainability a market, therefore enabling us to make sure that also every public sector euro or US dollar or whatever other currencies invested becomes multiplied or is multiplied by private sector investment. And I think this is absolutely important. Because I find that it's proving very hard also to move this market forward for a number of reasons, and I'll get to that in a second. Now, the other thing I was mentioning is public sector commitment. I think we're seeing for sure that, and obviously this event organized by both UN and Portuguese Space Agency shows the commitment that we're seeing and the raise in commitment of the public sector in making sure that space sustainability is an issue and no longer just something that we talk about. So this is definitely a plus. And this commitment has also come with statements regarding the need to develop space sustainability as a commercial sector, which I think is also great. However, there's then certain actions which are seen or certain things which are done, which makes it seem as if the public sector feels that it has or it carries the entire responsibility of making sure that space sustainability is done by the public sector. And I believe that there is no conflict between making sure that we have space sustainability and this is commercially successful and that there is a public sector responsibility. All of these things, these three elements can work together very easily and very harmoniously, really. And the other thing, obviously, is that the public sector alone doesn't have to solve space sustainability. You're not alone. The private sector is here with you. We are just as eager to make it happen. Your space certainly is, and we've heard from Planet and OneWeb as well. So you don't have to go it alone. This is a message I wanted to pass. Why am I saying this? Because frequently we see ambitions of the public sector providing complete and advanced services tailored to operators. And for me, these are clearly commercial services. They're not public services. And so one of the things that I'd certainly like to emphasize is industrialization is not commercialization. When a public sector entity says that it wants to invest in space sustainability and develop tailored services, for me, this doesn't fit together, right? So industrialization is about doing project procurement and about asking industry to develop building blocks, whereas commercialization is pushing companies to develop products that they will sell on a commercial market. A project-oriented industrialization, as I said, is about building blocks. Example, a one-year contract, one contract for 3 years, €5 million worth, for the development of algorithms or whatever for tailored free service to be provided by the public sector. This is industrialization. What we want is to develop commercial services that are built on a public sector service, conjunction data messages being one fantastic example for sure, but where then the commercial entities can provide services and they get multiple contracts worth a certain amount a year with multiple entities. Now, just to put numbers to this, and I was just thinking about this last night as I was putting the slides together. We know what the space economy in 2022 was. We see it here, $464 billion US dollars. If 1% of the space economy were to go to space sustainability, we would already have a market which is worth $5 billion US dollars. And again, we need to be able to show that this is a market so that we can bring in private investments so that we can actually make this a successful element. And as I said, there's multiple companies that are already investing in this and bringing forward products to this end. Now, the space sustainability rating is one that we've just heard about, and there's many more initiatives for sure. But it's clear that private sector entities are moving this forward and are demonstrating a felt responsibility to make sure that space is sustainable in the future. And this is not just a responsibility that relies on public sector initiatives. Now, obviously, one of the things that we do need is technology de-risking at a faster pace. I think is essential, faster because it's an issue which is becoming more and more urgent for sure. We have to sort of coordinate. We have to provide technology solutions which make sense, and being able to demonstrate these at a faster pace will certainly help us tackle this issue a lot faster. And again, this will obviously trigger the commercialization of products and, again, demonstrate that this is a market and get private sector investments involved. Now, one of the other things I wanted to emphasize, and I'm sorry if I'm stating the obvious for everyone who's listening to us, but one of the other things that I hear frequently is talk about regulating space traffic as if it were airline traffic. Space traffic is not airline traffic. It shouldn't be dealt with as if it were airline traffic. And I also believe that, by the way, airline traffic will be revolutionized in the next years. So we shouldn't use old templates to forge new ways forward or to forge the future. So that's also something I really wanted to emphasize when it comes to regulation. Now, we heard about just now the sharing of data between different operators, and I think that's great. I think it's great that operators are willing to do that. However, I also believe that forcing data transparency is not the only option. I think that there's other way forward. One of the things I always emphasize is, for example, federated learning. There are solutions that don't force entities to share this data, but enable them to keep privacy on that data and enable, however, services to be developed which build on that intelligence. This obviously enables also a way forward for everyone to be involved, not just those that feel that they don't have anything to hide. And unfortunately, or maybe it's natural, there are people that feel that they have something to hide. But that still doesn't mean that we can't profit then from the business intelligence that comes out of it. So when we have regulation which is too forceful in certain directions, I think it will be harder to implement. So again, I think it's important to have both technology and business informed regulation. If we focus on having technology demonstration at a faster pace, we will also be able to inject these insights that we gain into informed regulation. And as I said, I feel that the players in this panel all have something to contribute to making this happen. So I'm very happy that this is taking place. Now, just very quickly about Neurospace. Neurospace is a company which is working on space traffic management, and what we aim to do and are partially working on, of course, is to providing collision avoidance services. We have set on physics-informed algorithms, but also AI and machine learning, on automation to make sure that the operator side of things can be more and more efficient. And we do also want to provide data and proprietary data catalogs to operators that are willing and feel that this is helpful. We do already have a product on the market which we are continuously improving. We work in an agile way, so every 2 weeks we bring out new releases. We have real-time status updates and provide insight for quick decision making, where again we give an idea of what the conjunction is like, what the status is, what the risk of collision is, and then we go ahead and we provide maneuvering advice to customers to help them avoid these collisions. We're also working on coordinating. Callum was saying that it's helpful that, it's okay that things are still done via email. We believe that we could do better, so we're working on that as well. And we will have a service up and running in January that will enable operators that are using our platform to coordinate between themselves without having to rely on email, and can do that through our platform. Just a quick run on where we are in terms of numbers. We've raised 3 million private investments. We're a team of 30. We have 10 prospective and paying customers on our platform, with over 250 satellites that are currently on there. We've raised some public sector funds to enable to advance the TRL levels of our product as well. And again, one of the biggest aims that we have here is to really try and make sure that this is a market and that we are commercially successful as a company, and bring confidence also to VCs that they can invest in space sustainability in companies like ourselves and others. We've been happily named a Portuguese Minicorn this year, which is fantastic. I didn't even know that the word existed, but very happy about that. But again, it does show that there's some confidence in the growth of companies like ourselves in this market. And that was it for now. Looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Chiara. Hopefully now everyone can hear me and not just a select group. So apologies.
Yes, we can.
Technical challenges there. Great. And thank you, Ryan, for stepping in. Noting the time, I do want to move directly to our last two speakers. But I will say that since we are the very last panel of this wonderful workshop, and we have quite a large number of speakers on the panel, we will plan to go a little past the hour, probably 15 minutes or so. So if you're able to stick with us, we will continue to have that time for some discussion. So send in your questions and we'll try to get to those. But before that, let's hear now from Tim Florer from ESA.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. So I see nodding faces, which means you can hear me. This gives me also the possibility to share a few remarks from our side, and I hope everybody can see the slides now. So I'm trying to address the ESA perspective on collision avoidance and also interoperability of space operations. And well, many of my colleagues on the panel have already addressed their view on collision avoidance. Let me quickly share what is in the essence the issue that we cite. And I took the very easy step of making reference to absolutely wonderful infographics that the UN together with ESA produced about 3 years ago, and we recently updated those. And two of those set of infographics address what is relevant here. It's the cost of avoiding collisions and the increase in space traffic. So in the end, it is all about costs. It's about keeping the mission safe, but minimizing the cost. And by costs, we do not only have the financial aspects in mind, we also have in mind the time that you lose. Time is science time or operational time for data. But now taking a closer look on why are we all doing this? Why are we ready to spend these costs? You will immediately see that we have two perspectives on collision. And the local one, of course, is the perspective of the operator of the mission. It's about keeping the mission safe, as I said. And we know from the models and we know from the experiments that even something as small as 1 centimeter in diameter can end your mission. It will probably not create a large fragment cloud, which would then be the global perspective while we're trying to avoid collisions. But for your specific mission, it can be absolutely as well. So let's keep in mind that there's a local perspective of the operator, but there's also a global perspective from the environment. And colliding with larger objects, 5 centimeters or larger, then would certainly mean that you create a cloud of more fragments, and all of them with the potential to create subsequent collisions. And this is also taking up these accidental breakups by collisions are taken up by standards and also by the long-term stability guidelines. Now, ESA issues every year a report on the space debris environment, and I took these two plots that you see here, and also, by the way, the other plots from the 2023 edition. And what we did here, and we took several altitudes that you see on the left-hand side, so 500 kilometer, 550, 700, and so on, and put a hypothetical satellite in there and try to check what is the conjunction partners, so the objects getting close to this satellite in the course of 1 year, and how many of those would require attention. Attention means the risk is above a certain threshold where you would start analyzing the event and would start considering to take evasive action. There you see something massively has changed in the course of the last 2 years. And what has changed the last 2 years is driven by the right-hand side plot. It's the enormous increase of objects in LEO. And mainly these are active objects of the large constellations. And these constellations need traffic to get there and to get out of the constellation. Now, if you look at the 500 and 550 kilometers, the two first bars on the left-hand side, you see they are dominated by this grayish, dark blue fraction of the objects. And these are active satellites belonging to constellations or small satellites or other satellites in that regime. And these are the majority in these low LEO altitudes. While on the higher LEO altitudes, so everything around 800 kilometers, the fragments of previous events, collisions or ASAT tests in that altitude are still dominating what they did in the past. But these active versus active satellite, those that require coordination among the actors are dominating some altitude. And as some of the previous speakers have outlined already, those come with all these needs of contact data, all these needs of understanding the intent of the other partner, all these needed concurrence on the reference frame of the data. And in the end, it all means trust among the operators. And this is the main thing. How much do you trust the information you're getting from somebody else on the intent to maneuver the satellite or not? And that is the really pain point. So how could we address this? And in ESA, we developed technology. We have a space safety program where also automation of collision avoidance decisions is taken as the objective forward. So on the left-hand side, you see what we do today. We have a partially automated screening process. We have partly automated communication among the flight control teams, the analysts, and the outside world. But what we do not have is it's not fully automated. That is creating a lot of overhead, and that is creating costs. So what we are doing, we look into what can we learn from the past? So how can we train models? How can we take automated decisions that are also trusted? How can we design maneuvers in an efficient but still highly automated way? And that's the pain point that I mentioned before, how can we make sure that all the others of our orbital neighbors are aware of what we are planning? And one thing that we did in 2019 already, we issued a data set of anonymized conjunction data messages to the academic community of the researchers, and that was to test how far are we already with machine learning. The main conclusion is it will not solve all the problems, but we are pretty fast, and it's definitely, as also Chiara outlined, federated learning is certainly something very interested, also supporting the decision processes through machine learning. So that is something that we see evolving in the future. But there's another trend I wanted to highlight, and that is when we look at the traffic, at these 2,500 satellites we put every year into LEO. But if we look at the sizes of those, because here we color-coded this plot into the mass of these objects. And yet now you see that in the past, the 70s and 80s, we had heavy birds flying there, all of them above the 1 metric ton. But now the 100 kilogram satellites and also smaller ones are taking over. These are the majority. And for some of them, we are putting our space surveillance systems at the limit of what they can do. And the right-hand side plot tries to show this. This is the time, how long it takes from massive deployments, so multiple satellite deployments from a single launch until they end up in the catalog. So, and only if they're in the catalog, you can take decisions based on the shared knowledge. For some of them, it's pretty fast. It takes a matter of days. But for some of them, and especially the green curve here, even after half a year, you're still in the 80% identified satellites in the catalog. And that is really an issue because you can only avoid the threat that you know. So it's not only the increase of the traffic, it's also to be aware of the traffic. So to conclude from the ESA point of view, we can certainly say on our side, it is an operational reality today to do collision avoidance. Of course, it's driven by self-interest of operators, but it's also driven more and more by ensuring long-term sustainability of the use of the orbital environment. In ESA, we have a standardized process. We have a database discourse that we curate and also share with other providers of collision avoidance this data. We are heavily investing in automating our workflows, and we also share our tools and knowledge for the mission design where you have to take into account the collision avoidance needs. The main changes we see in the future is we will get better data. We will also get better means for data sharing. We will also get better coordination methods, and we will heavily see more automation coming in the next years. And that's a necessity. I mentioned already our space safety program where we do the technology development and also de-risking for business cases of those. And this all contributes to, this is my very final slide, to something that we put forward at ESA. It's the zero debris approach that I also wanted to share with you. There's a charter document, has been mentioned already by other speakers, which is a community approach facilitated by ESA to set challenging but feasible goals to achieve by 2030 for safety and sustainability of the use of space. In ESA, we have already taken this on board. We very recently, at the beginning of the month of November, we changed our space debris mitigation policy and now have zero debris as part of that. The underlying requirements are shared. They are accessible from our website. And what we are now working on is a booklet for the technologies we need, and collision avoidance is an essential part of that, as you can imagine. And with that, I would conclude and thank you for it.
Great. Thank you, Tim, so much for that presentation. And next we'll hear from Veronique.
Good day, everybody. Thank you for giving the ITU the opportunity to speak in this panel. When we speak about space traffic management, it's from our point of view a multifaceted area. So we heard the need of positioning services to create the ephemeris. We heard the need of radar services to meet or not, or to avoid other objects, at least to position them. And there's also the need of telecommand, teletracking, and control of the space objects. And all those services required spectrum resources. And when it comes to spectrum resources, so we speak about the ITU radio communication sector and what we are doing here, especially here in Dubai today, because I'm at the World Radio Conference. And that's good news in terms that there's a possibility to obtain the necessary spectrum to ensure the use of the services and having them available free from harmful interference. Because all those services may have not the same level of risk in case of harmful interference. For example, for the control of the object, it's really high risk if you are losing through because of interference, radio interference, the control of the objects. And my very main message is to use the mechanism of the ITU-R, the World Radio Communication Conference mechanism, the study group mechanism here, to ensure that the needs and future needs of this use for space traffic management of space objects are protected within the radio regulations. So we encourage the actors of the STM to approach the spectrum managers and to actively follow the study and the work of the WRC in case there's need of new spectrum protection and allocation. Thank you. That's a quick introduction and end of my presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And now we have some time to take questions from the audience and to have some discussion among our panelists. As I mentioned, if you're just joining, although we're scheduled to end at 10, we will go a little bit over, about 15 minutes or so that we do have this chance to have discussion, even though we have 5 excellent panelists. Let me start you out with a question, just reflecting on some of the presentations. A number of you mentioned the importance of transparency and sharing information, and this is something that came up in the previous panel as well. So I'm curious if you could talk about, what do you see as the benefits of full transparency, as some companies have done and as some have advocated, as opposed to a more limited type of sharing, as Chiara mentioned in her presentation? What are some of the pros and cons of these different models? And anyone in particular want to take that first?
I can start. Yeah, I think full transparent, we would need to define what full transparency means. I think transparency towards making collision avoidance decisions more reliable, that should be the goal. So that might not mean, we don't need to know the full design of the satellite, but maybe just the mass, is the ballistic coefficient updated, or is using a default value. Yeah, I think having as a starting point, what's the requirement for us as operators to be able to make a judgment, whether taking an action or not on a conjunction event? What data allows us to take that decision with an acceptable risk? I think that level of transparency.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in? I think both on what data do we share, what information needs to be shared, kind of as you spoke to, Katja, and then also with whom do you share it? Who needs to actually see that? Is it just shared among operators, or should we have some more publicly shared information?
I can talk to this as well. I think something that Tim mentioned was really interesting was that in particularly lower altitudes of LEO, where there are many, many more operators than higher altitudes, you really do have to just trust that other actors are going to operate in the way that you think that they might do. And I think the minimum level of transparency is how do you coordinate safely between the two operators involved. I think that's the absolute minimum that we should aim for. And how do you do that in a way that is kind of standardized? But also, I really do agree with what Chiara said about forcing transparency. I don't think is a good approach, because we need all actors to feel encouraged and involved to be part of this space traffic management. Otherwise, the whole system breaks down, because ultimately it has to be a global approach.
Great, thank you. That is a nice transition to another issue that came up in a few of the presentations, which is this idea of automation and the potential for automation to play a role in the way that we do collision avoidance and the way that we do space traffic coordination. This seems like something that is seen pretty positively from a number of different entities. So my question is, what do you see as the next steps there? How do we set up a system like this? Is it, and as a number of you mentioned, this is a global environment where we're all working across different countries. So how do you start with something like that?
Maybe just to get the conversation started, thank you for the question. I think this was a bit what I was trying to say with technically informed regulation, right? Having sort of rules of the roads. I think that we've heard this expression in the past years a lot. Would be a place to start, right? So who should behave in which way, when, would be certainly a common grounds for understanding. I've heard conversations, and I think one of the papers that was also presented, I think it was Callum that was showing it, where it talks about, maybe should a more modern satellite move with respect to an older satellite? What about end of life considerations? So I think if we really start breaking down the issue in trying to get rules of the road in place, that would be a nice place to start, because then it's clear who should be moving when. and then you can automate that, or that would be a first step towards automation for sure, or reliable automation, because I mean you can always automate stuff, but it should be reliable here for sure.
Yeah, if I may continue from here, and thanks, Chiara, for pointing it out. I still believe that waiting for regulation, I'm sure that's not what Chiara meant, but waiting for regulation to give us the rules of the road would not be correct, would probably take too long. The pressure on operators today to keep their own missions safe and also to implement all the requirements for preserving the environment around them is already calling for as you just showed, the bilateral coordination among operators. Now, I personally think that we will soon see much more adoption of services that ensure coordination among operators. And that will, of course, be first those who are willing to participate in that. But this will soon be extended. And I just wonder whether we see one or multiple of those services and who takes the decision to which of those services I shall subscribe. But this is actually in the end a technical discussion. And then I somehow feel that as everywhere, technology is faster than the regulation, and regulation will just help after that. But maybe a bit provoking.
Anyone else want to jump in there? Louise, let me ask you, we have on this panel a number of individuals and organizations that are fairly advanced in their SSA capabilities and in their space traffic coordination capabilities. When you think of the broader space community and some of the actors that are maybe new to space, how does that affect some of your recommendations and some of the things you talked about in your presentations in terms of how we coordinate? How do we bring maybe new space actors, universities, others kind of into this realm? Does that pose different challenges, or is it can really be dealt with all in the same way?
Maybe just one thing that we as Neurospace we're obviously trying to do is, so first of all, we've decided that we're happy to provide our services for free of charge to universities because we believe that it's something important to do. But the way we're going about space traffic management isn't as collision avoidance as such, but adding the automation and relieving that automation that makes it, or will make it even more burdensome. So what we try and do when we reach out also to new players is knowing that they have already challenges moving into operations, because space isn't it's complex after all, right? So we're trying to alleviate that complexity of operations by starting with collision avoidance and taking it further. And that's how we go about also, as I said, talking with and pulling in new players and, players that maybe have less availability in terms of operational effort and everything else.
Great. So maybe having some of these services available in different ways to kind of bring everybody to the same level. Sure. We have a question from the audience as well. So on this issue of kind of both the policy and the technology, the regulation, the person asks, if regulation takes more time to come to life than what is expected, then how does the industry adapt or regulate themselves, regulate their own behavior in that scenario? So if there isn't regulation in place, how do you expect that which is kind of the scenario right now, how does that move forward?
Muriel, sorry, I'll start again. I think both Tim and Colm said something to this effect, and Tim was very clear, emphasizing there's costs associated with collision avoidance, right? So, and Tim also mentioned, and I do agree with him, regulation will take longer to come than we expect or we wish, for sure. And there is just a pragmatism that needs to be adopted by industry to tackle the problem, right? So in the end, I think it's going to be a pragmatism and a will to contain costs that will move industry into action. At latest then, if the actual topic of being sustainable doesn't move them, then I think that will, the economics of it, the cost equation.
Sure, there's certainly some self-interest involved, right, in acting sustainably.
Yes, and I would like to remind that in 1963 was the first introduction of the space services in the radio regulation, and it was only a few years, very quickly after the first artificial satellite operating around the world, and it was modifying an international treaty, the radio regulations, and all the member states agreed to do it because at that time there was a very high risk of escalating the Cold War and conflict in outer space. So it's as I said previously, it's question of risk and economy and saving the investment also. When there's a need to move and to do global regulations, it's possible. Just question of investing in it. And luckily for the regulation of spectrum resources, we've got this well-trained mechanism to have the regulation evolving. Today it doesn't exist for the objects and space traffic management, so it's to be created or to be inspired by other kind of treaty. We'll see what will happen. But I agree, question of risk and will to invest or protect investment.
Thank you. I think it brings up this interesting point. There's this question of timing of the regulation and how it relates to the advance of technology, but also, of course, the content of any policy or regulation. And so I'm wondering if you have recommendations from your perspective and from a technical perspective as those types of regulations or kind of international systems are set up. Do you have thoughts on how that process proceeds and how it can be done well in a way that's going to provide stability and certainty as opposed to any concerns? Or we'll leave that for the policy conference that's coming up in a couple months. Let me go back then to the question of transparency. And I'm thinking in particular, Caleb and Katja, you both mentioned in your own organizations, your organization has chosen to take quite a high level of transparency in terms of activities on orbit and the amount of information kind of published even openly on the website. Could you talk a little bit about that decision? What information was put up, why your organization chose to do that?
Yeah, so I think both Eutelsat and formerly OneWeb have always been very dedicated to being a responsible space actor. And I think it's interesting the comments that for the last couple of questions about the kind of economics, both cost of time, cost of financials, they kind of drive this sustainable practice. And so it's in our own advantage as well as the advantage of the industry to be as transparent as possible, to share this information and say, hey, this is what we are doing. So for example, we have 24/7 contact information in our CDMs logged with the space track. We have a 24/7 email and phone line available on the website. You can call us at any moment to discuss any conjunction that you might have with a Eutelsat vehicle. Our system will also flag a close approach with any other operational or active secondary object. And then we will typically take maneuver responsibility because we're very nimble. And this is always proactively coordinated. So we will generally share, here's our maneuver plan, here's our ephemeris via email. That is something that we're targeting to have in a more automated fashion in the way that we've talked about in the recent questions. But so I think for us, it's the kind of like bare minimum that we defined as a transparency that you should provide. And I think if you're maneuvering around someone's vehicle, then I think a minimum that you could do is tell them that you're there and tell them what you're planning to do and make sure that they're happy with it, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's on our own interest as well. And, we knew we were going to deploy a large constellation because that was our mission statement since long ago. So yeah, as Callum said, is really low low effort for high gain. It just makes it easier to coordinate with others. They have the data readily available for them to use their own evaluations and then be able to coordinate with us, which otherwise would be an extra step, which just doesn't benefit either party.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And I think these comments and issues that you are all raising are so important. I'm coming from the Office of Space Commerce, where we're developing the new civil SSA system in the United States, so the Traffic Coordination System for Space, or TRACS. And as we're developing these systems, all these questions about transparency, about international cooperation, and really the future of where we're headed for collision avoidance and for space traffic management or space traffic coordination are so important. And I think this panel has really demonstrated how different operators and different entities within this community are all bringing something very important to this conversation. And it just emphasizes for me how much we really need to come together to figure out what are the next concrete steps to move forward with the technology, move forward with our information sharing capabilities, and move forward with the regulation, right? So we're now in this first of the series of workshops. The next one is going to focus on policy and hopefully really moving forward this conversation. We're now just about at the end of our extended time. I did want to just go back to the panelists one last time if you have any closing remarks that you'd want to share or takeaways for the audience. And maybe we can just go in the order that we were listed. So Caleb, Katya, Chiara, that order.
Sure, yeah, on the spot. No, I think, honestly, I am very happy to be on this panel, very honored to be able to share these views. So thank you again for inviting us to speak. I think I would close just by saying that I fully agree with almost everything that has been said here. There's a lot of wisdom both from the ESA side and the SSA provider side, as well as large operators and regulatory bodies. So I'm looking forward to seeing the outcome of this event, and also for the next session in March. So thank you very much.
Yeah, same from my side. I think it's really useful to have this type of forums where we have a mix of players. We have industry, we have government, different experts from different point of views. I think that's what we need. And maybe like one takeaway is what Tim said. Like, we don't have to wait for regulations to be in place, but I think the industry has demonstrated, and this type of forums demonstrates, that work goes in parallel. And there are small steps being implemented. It's not something that's going to get solved in one shot, rather like iterations. So that's good to see, and I'm sure that's going to continue. Thanks.
Likewise, message from me. I'm actually very confident that we're moving in the right direction, and that we're actually accelerating also in the right direction because of the joint efforts that we're seeing from different parties. And we've heard it from the panel today. And yes, I'm still convinced space sustainability is a market, and it's going to be happening very, very soon. So thank you again.
Yeah, we share that view as well. We are living in absolutely exciting times when we look at the increase of the space traffic, but also when we look at the acceleration on the commercial side and also on the governmental side in new approaches to share data to ensure sustainable use of our space as a resource, and also keeping missions safe. It's absolutely exciting times once again. And my main message again is the key pain point among operators, how I perceive it, is to trust the information that others are sharing. And this goes to trusting people you have never met, trusting entities you have never worked with, and that we have to find appropriate technical solutions. But this somehow is not a problem only for space traffic. There's also other domains, and maybe we should also look to other areas and learn from them. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, and here in ITU, it's our role to bridge the gap. I mean, not the gap, to connect the needs of the operators and the technology with the UN. Providing the certainty of a treaty to ensure the investment and the operation. So we do it for spectrum resources, and we are ready, and we are at the listening to the delegates to do the more steps towards space sustainability, and together with the other UN entities, each in our mandates. So I personally believe that it's by working all together, doing that type of exchanges, that we can create a real synergies and each other's giving some step towards a full regulation and certainty. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And one last thank you to our wonderful panelists. Thank you to the audience for sticking with us here. And thank you again to the organizers, to the Portuguese Space Agency, and to the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs. It's been a wonderful 3-day conference, and my honor to moderate this panel. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Muriel. And just final words from our side. First of all, we really apologize, Muriel, for the technical issues. Once again, thank you very much for your patience and to keep up with us and to be here. Ryan, also thank you very much for taking over and make it work. So thank you very much for that. And of course, thank you for the panelists of today for this session. Also for the last 3 days, we had different areas on space resources, on space traffic management and space debris. The last 3 days were very useful for the input for what will come next in the next policy symposium on 11 and 15 of March. So keep it with us for that symposium. All the sessions will be available on YouTube, and all of the outcomes of these sessions will be reported then at the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee at COPUS. So once again, thank you to the Portuguese Space Agency team, also the UNUSA team and the director Arti for all of the support. And we'll keep in touch. Please continue following us on our website where all the information will be there. Thank you very much to everyone.